समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Where does India's left stand today in our politics or in our mind space? Should we even bother? Now, the reason we talk about this is that just a few weeks back, on 26th of December, the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Communist Party of India, as the party was known first, then it split into many. Communist Party of India was founded on 26th December 1925 in Kanpur by about 500 delegates. That 100th anniversary passed, nobody seemed to notice. At the same time, the same day, it just so happened that 26th December is also Mao Zedong's birth anniversary. That's a touch of irony there. He was born in 1893, so he must have been just about 32 years old in 1925. So he had nothing to do with the founding of the Communist Party of India. It was also on the same day that we saw headlines of the killing of Ganesh Uike, known by many aliases, a member of the Central Committee of the Maoists. Maoists, who are now called People's War, also CPI Maoist. The reason I mention this is that within this in 100 years, from the day of the formal founding of the CPI to the day of Ganesh Uike's death, and he's from CPI Maoist, this tells you the entire evolution, history, and self-destruction of India's left. In fact, so divided is India's left that when the CPI celebrated or observed its 100th anniversary, neither CPM nor any of the other left factions even sent it a congratulatory note, because each one thinks that their date of founding was something else. The CPM thinks, for example, that it was founded in Tashkent in 1920 by revolutionaries like M.N. Roy, who incidentally had left India. He had gone into exile because he was a revolutionary who the British were after. He went to Mexico and first founded the Communist Party of Mexico in 1919. That was around time of Jallianwala Bagh in India. In 1920, he and 6 other Indian revolutionaries met in Tashkent and they set up a kind of Indian Communist Party under the Comintern. Comintern was the international sort of organization that the Soviet communists had set up, under which all communist parties everywhere were to owe their loyalty or to learn their ideology from. CPM would think that was their founding date. That is when their party came into being. However, in 1925, when the CPI was formed, the same CPM elements were there also. Since then, there have been many splits. Every time there was a serious disagreement within the Communist Party, every serious agreement led to a split. The interesting thing is, 1925, Communist Party of India was founded. Just 3 months before that, the RSS was founded. So, with the 3 months interval, both the RSS, the hard group of the right, and the Communist Party of India, the hard group of the left, were formed. And we can see over 100 years what's happened to each of them. The RSS has remained strong, has become much stronger. It now controls the entire country. It controls the party that runs the government in the country. Plus, in many states, RSS's people are now in key positions across the country, including the central government. The left, on the other hand, the Communist Party, on the other hand, is completely broken up and declined. In fact, that's the reason I gave you the example of Ganesh Uike, that is the last of the revolutionary groups of the Communist Party. Communist Party had started as a revolutionary group. Initially, initially they had many debates about whether India's freedom movement was good enough for them to join or not, because they saw it as some kind of a bourgeois operation. They even saw the Indian independence as a creation of a dictatorship of the bourgeois. They wanted a dictatorship of the proletariat. So until 1948, 49, 1950, 51, they saw Indian independence not in the same light as most of the rest of the country saw. And these contradictions have chased India's left right through. In fact, in 1930, from 1930 onwards, they did join the national freedom movement. But once again, the Second World War started and the internationalist instinct took over. And then they decided to support the Soviet Union in Great Patriotic War because they were fighting Hitler, and thereby refused to support the Congress Party in Quit India movement. In fact, they opposed the Quit India movement. So the history of the communists in India has always been this contradiction between their internationalist impulses and their nationalist impulses. In the early 50s, a group of communist leaders went to the Soviet Union, even met Stalin, who said, listen, join your politics. Join your politics. That is the way to get power. So some of the communists, 1958 onwards, after the party's session in Amritsar, they decided to join national politics. But still some stayed out. Now, where do I read that? I read this particularly in detail in two publications, the Malabar Journal. It's a long article by R. Krishnan Mohan, and People's Review. It's an article written anonymously. Both are very detailed, comprehensive articles, and both are very honest articles because they also look inwards, and both have told us the story of why the left in India never quite grew as it probably would have or should have or could have in a society as poor and as unjust as India, and why it is today in the situation that it is. I read here analysis that post-independence, there was a Calcutta Congress of the left where they decided that India still needed a working class insurrection. Remember, that was the period when Nehru was also arresting several of the left sympathizers or left activists, including actor Balraj Sahni, for example, lyricist Majrooh Sultanpuri, because he would not tolerate people who were not accepting the emergence of a new Indian state, a constitutional state after the freedom movement. The communists even now wanted to follow the Chinese path, the revolutionary Chinese path. It was in that process also that some key socialists, including Jayaprakash Narayan, left the Congress party because they also wanted a slightly more revolutionary path. They wanted India to change fundamentally, which wasn't happening. This introspection, as I told you earlier, came in after India's communists went to meet Stalin in Moscow. Now, much happened after that. In 1962, the Chinese came attacking. When the Chinese came attacking, that split the Indian Communist Party because they idolized Mao Zedong. So one faction said that, look, Indian sovereignty is very important. We must come to the defense of the motherland. This was led by S.A. Dange. Comrade S.A. Dange was the leader, or seen as the leader, or convicted as a leader of the famous Meerut conspiracy case, which was the big leftist revolutionary action against the British. She, along with 31 other communists, fellow communists, were sentenced to transportation. They were not sent to Andamans, to the cellular jail, but they were sent to a specially set up camp at Deoli in Maharashtra near Wardha and subjected to really harsh conditions. He said that this is a question of the defense of the motherland, and India is right in its claims on its boundary. The other group, led by EMS Namudripad, I will tell you a story about that as we go along, personal story, EMS Namudripad and P. Sundaraiah and others said that this is bourgeois nationalism, that Nehru is taking India into a war against China of bourgeois nationalism, that we should lean towards, we should not give up the path of working class internationalism. And Nehru's militarization of India's polity actually is anti-democratic. This is what ultimately led in 1964 to Communist Party of India splitting formally. Again, I told you, every time the communists had a major argument among themselves, they split, whereas The RSS kept on getting stronger and stronger and stronger over time. Whatever setbacks they might have had, they were twice banned. Leaders were jailed multiple times, but they continued to get stronger. They did not split. In 1964, the big split came. There was a convention, the National Convention in Kolkata between October and November. That's when two groups sat separately and did not even talk to each other, look at each other. At the end of it, one emerged as being influenced, or one emerged as being influenced or as being loyal to the Soviet Union. By this time, Soviet Union had become India's friend, and the Soviet Union and the Chinese had had their famous big split. The other group, the larger group, said that they will remain loyal to their own ideological thinking, which in this case meant being pro-China. So I remember from my childhood those days, All India Radio or Akashvani, in the news would say Moscow-wadi, Moscow-wadi or Beijing-wadi, Moscow-panthi or Beijing-panthi, for the two factions of the Communist Party as they emerged now. This continued on. CPI supported Mrs. Gandhi in the run-up to the Congress split, and then Mrs. Gandhi's big socialist drive takes credit for a lot of her nationalizations and also for the insertion of the word socialist and secular in the preamble of the Constitution. The CPI also supported the emergency, which they later acknowledged was an error. The CPM went its own way. Ultimately, they all came together as the National Front. Ultimately, they all came together as the Left Front, which ruled West Bengal for 34 years, Tripura many times, and also Kerala alternately with Congress until last time when they won 2 consecutive terms. Meanwhile, splits never stopped. In 1967, the CPM split, not the CPI, that CPI-CPM split had taken place in 1964. 1967, the CPM split, and that is when one faction under Charu Majumdar went out and started the Naxal movement, Naxalbari movement. That faction called itself CPI-ML. Since then, that CPI-ML, I read in these papers, has split about 40 times. Its last three factions, one was CPI-ML Liberation, that chose the path of parliamentary democracy. That usually has an MP in parliament, if not two. It contests elections in Bihar in partnership with the secular coalition there, and that you will always find in parliament. The other two groups, one called itself People's War, the other called itself Maoist Communist Center. In 2004, they came together and now named themselves CPI Maoist. It is the CPI Maoist which has since then based this 20 plus years of insurgency in India's east central heartland, and which is what is currently on its way down. That is my short history and understanding of India's left, its many splits, and how it has lost power, how it reached the peak of its power and how it lost it. And everywhere, the basic contradiction with the Indian left was, whose side are you on? Are you on India's side? Are you pursuing some internationalist agenda? Do you think that something that is good for India may not conform to your internationalist instincts or beliefs? Or are you going to deal with that with a closed mind? You can see that in the electoral performance of the left front over the past 20 years, say between 2004 and 2024. 2004 was the peak of the left. They already ruled West Bengal. They were ruling Tripura. They won 59 seats in national election. In fact, that's how the UPA government came into being, because the left won so many seats. They won 59, CPM got 43, CPI got 10. Now they were partners in the left front, as with some of the other groups which had broken away, again based on ideological differences and debates. 2009, this 59 fell to 24. How did that happen? Because 2008, the nuclear deal was put up to vote in national parliament. And the CPM then, the left front, CPM led the left front, they said, look, it doesn't matter what Manmohan Singh wants. It doesn't matter if it's a secular government or a government that we supported on the grounds of being secular, but this is a deal with the Americans. So our dislike of the Americans, or our hatred of the Americans, or our opposition to the Americans, is a stronger instinct ideologically than the political sense of staying on with the coalition which has given us so much power. That is the point where they broke away from the UPA. They were outside partners. They broke away from the UPA. They joined hands with the BJP and Mayawati to try and bring down the UPA government, their own child. It did not work. The voters punished them. What was 59 became 24. Since then, the voters have been punishing them. 2014, they came to just 12 seats. CPM 9, CPI 1. One odd obviously went to some of the other partners in left front. 2019, they hit their rock bottom. Just 5 seats. 5 seats in parliament, 3 to the CPM, 2 to CPI. In 2024, they say it improved a little bit. So they got 8 seats, from 5 to 8, 59, 24, 12, 5 and 8 now, 4 with the CPM, 2 with the CPI. Many of these seats also are there because of their larger alliance partners. For example, DMK in Tamil Nadu or RJD Congress in Bihar. And meanwhile, CPI Maoist even today describes all of these communist parties as class traitors. At which point I bring you to my own experience or exposure to India's left, which was the cricketing equivalent of a first ball duck. That's how it began. As a journalism student in 1975. I lost a 10 rupee bet with the lone comrade, in fact a near Naxal in our class, Darshan Singh. Jack his nickname was. He lives in London now. He was a near Naxal on whether EMS Namudri Pad was dead or alive. This is 1975. I obviously thought he was dead. Much later, while doing my first story out of Kerala with the Dada journalist there, Ramesh Menon, and this was a story on the left front government's literacy program, I finally came face to face with EMS, then General Secretary of the CPM. I told him about my lost bet. He offered his hand to me, pointing to his wrist, and he said, "Why don't you check my pulse? Why don't you check my pulse?" He said, "Deadpan, maybe you were right and should get that 10 rupees back." There was much laughter. So communists have a sense of humor. The reason I was so ignorant on the left, even as a journalism student, is partly because in small town schools and colleges of Punjab and later Haryana, there wasn't much politics. There was hardly any unions, and none of the left unions, to the odd teacher would like to be addressed as comrade so and so. I learned about India's political left, therefore, on the job as a journalist. I also grew to be a tough critic of the left, especially of its economic ideology and socio-political hypocrisy. How could an ideology that draws its power from authoritarianism or inspiration from Moscow or Beijing hyphenate itself with democratic, as in left democratic constitutional, hello, or worse, left liberal? How could a leadership mostly controlled by upper caste Bhadralok, educated overseas in many cases or in the privileged Indian institutions, constantly talk of equality and weaker sections? There was never a juncture through these decades when I found myself in agreement with the left's policies. I resented also the intellectual and philosophical arrogance that if you were not with us, you were an idiot or an immoral bootlicker of the capitalists. The epithet neoliberal came much later, and it was actually much less offensive. Or maybe there was one phase when we saw nationalist leftists, nationalist communists. When the third, the bloodiest and the last round of terrorism was on in Punjab between 1989 and 93, the only political force which still had the workers willing and motivated to stay back, fight and sacrifice their lives in villages and border districts that militants claimed were liberated were of the communist parties. The police had given them arms. In one case, we recorded even an LMG. That's the story I've written about. And in my last writings from the vault from Punjab, the lady I'm talking about, the woman I'm talking about, featured. So please check it out. We'll share a link with you. One of them even had an LMG, which the young woman comrade, see her picture, she had set up on the rooftop to protect her home. Her husband won an Ashok Chakra as a civilian. Later, not long ago, he was assassinated by the terrorists. Several of her family members had been killed already. Barring that phase in one state, I found nothing to cheer about the left. I chafed when CPI's A.B. Bardhan made his infamous Bhad Mein Jaye disinvestment statement after the Vajpayee government lost unexpectedly in 2004. I cheered when Manmohan Singh won his vote of confidence over the nuclear deal, despite the left joining hands with the forces it would have held in disdain as communal, casteist, and reactionary, including the BJP. And subsequently, when Mamata Banerjee destroyed them in West Bengal, I was happy. It was evident then that the story of the Indian political left was over, and the militant left in East Central Asia was headed inevitably that way. The good thing about the left is, the best thing I will say about the left in India is that they made the most accessible, open and big-hearted and affectionate leaders in a personal sense. From EMS to Harkishan Singh Surjit, who featured in a Walk the Talk, in fact a very good Walk the Talk, parts of which were recorded in his living room with this picture with Chow and Lai, which he proudly displayed in his living room. And then on to Sitaram Yechuri, Prakash Karat, through the entire Bengal pantheon of the left. They've all been accessible, friendly, and they take criticism on the chin. They disagree with you, but never stop talking with you. Manik Sarkar, who served as a very successful Chief Minister of Tripura, was one of those figures as well, also featured in Walk the Talk. But that doesn't affect my low view of their politics or ideology. I am not, therefore, someone you would expect to protest the destruction of the Indian left now, particularly now with the armed left group being decimated in East Central India. I don't like violence. I don't like any of my compatriots dying, but they have the option also of coming out and surrendering, which happily a lot of them are taking by the scores. In the late 80s, the Soviet Union was heading for collapse. Its war in Afghanistan was lost. 1989, they retreated from Afghanistan. Gorbachev had brought in perestroika and glasnost. Deng was opening up China. I came to Calcutta then, working on a detailed piece for India Today magazine on India's unchanging left. Saroj Mukherjee, then CPM State Secretary in West Bengal, sat in his headquarters under giant portraits of Lenin, Stalin and Marx. Gorbachev and Deng are changing, sir. Why aren't you changing, I asked. I asked the obvious question. Because my communism is purer than that of Deng and Gorbachev, said the strong man, arms raised like this, with the fullest conviction. In just about 2 years, I was in Moscow watching the Soviet Union unravel with the republics breaking away. In Bucharest, as the tanks still stood in the streets, but with tulips in their guns, and angry people in scores coming to where Ceausescu had been killed to curse and spit. A few weeks earlier, an Indian left delegation had returned from the Romanian Communist Party's National Congress, and some of its members had written jointly an article in the Pioneer calling all news of Ceausescu's brutalities and falling regime as Western propaganda. Evidence they cited: when the dictator finished his speech, the applause was deafening and wouldn't stop for hours. Nobody asked, would anyone dare to stop? Exactly 8 months later that year, I was back in Moscow watching the busts and idols of communist icons pulled out. With the Soviet equivalent of today's JCBs, very few, barring some really old World War II veterans, showed regret. It was good riddance, they said. If the ideology was gone, so should the images of tyrants who built their brutal dictatorship on it. India has left also, like the Soviet Communist Party, has lost power everywhere. I told you they have only 8 MPs now, some of whom are also at the sufferance for other parties. They only have one perch now, which is Kerala. And since they've been in power for 2 successive terms now, it does look like they are on very slippery ground there as well. We can therefore say that their power has been downhill for a long time, and right now it's almost finished politically. India's left is almost finished politically, but here lies the rub. While they have terminally declined as a national political force, in one area their victory has been total, pan-national, and it seems today permanent. It is the imprint they have made on India's economic thought and political economy. Even in today's bitterly polarized politics, if there is one thing that not just the BJP and Congress, but all other parties agree on, it is that socialist economics and poverty-ridden politics is the only way to survive and win elections. The left is dying, it's nearly dead, its icons are being JCB'd, but its economic ideology rules unchallenged. Narendra Modi, in many ways, is the newest standard bearer and most powerful one since Indira Gandhi. And finally, the story I told you earlier that I will tell you. Reporters are derided for their "as my taxi driver told me" stories. In Prague, where communism unraveled under Václav Havel's Velvet Revolution, your driver could be an out-of-work computer engineer in a nuclear lab, as was one of mine. Conversation was centered inevitably, and this is, I'm taking you back to 1990, conversation was centered inevitably on excesses and failures of communism. He had many questions on how and why socialism was still so popular in India, and communists were often elected in important states. This is 1990-91. Then he gave his diagnosis as to why communism was still so popular in India. He said, your socialism was different from ours. Ours took away our political freedoms and also economic freedoms, while yours took away the economic freedoms but left your political freedoms intact. When these were taken away, when your political freedoms were taken away during the emergency, you fought to win these back. But since you never tasted economic freedoms, you could not realize what socialism had lost you, and you never fought to get those back. In the 12th year of the BJP, I'd say he was still partly right. It so happens that our entire political class, including the BJP, has picked up one side of the left ideology. The BJP has dumped the social aspect of the left ideology, but they have kept with them the socialist or the economic aspect or the welfarist aspect of the left ideology.